Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth part of the Q&A. We are getting a lot of questions lately, so we will see how long it will take to finish all of them. Again, with me we have Saif and myself, Flaus, and we will answer your questions today. And without much talk, we will start with the first question. And this one is from an anonymous person, and the person wants to know, the Dhamma is an okay thing to attach to until Arahantship, correct? And that question is, I would answer it with a yes. I think the Buddha said the best thing that you can attach to as a mundane conditioned thing is a Noble Eightfold Path. So he even praised that kind of attachment, as it leads you to non-attachment, as it leads you to non-craving. So you should very much be attached to the Dhamma, and at some point you can let go of it. The Buddha compared it with a raft. After you have crossed the flood with that raft that you have built for yourself, you can leave it behind. You don't need it anymore. But until then, you very much need that raft to cross the flood and reach the safe shore and get away from the dangerous near shore. That's how we put it. Well, anything to add?
Yeah. Think about it a lot. Make it your obsession, really. And like, if you have the desire for freedom of suffering, and you make it very urgent, it will propel you forward. So yeah, it's a good thing to attach yourself to in that sense. Obviously, you need to not attach yourself in the sense of like using the Dhamma as an escape from your feelings and so on, or to get pleasant feelings. But in general, like, yeah, it's very good to like think about the Dhamma a lot and so on. Attach yourself to it.
Yeah, I think there's not much else to say about that. There are dangers in attachment, as you can surely use everything pretty much to derive pleasure from it. So Mara, in a sense, can be very deceiving, and he can hide himself very well, even behind meditative practices. But overall, if you really mean the teaching by attachment, the Dhamma itself as an attachment, then yes, that's a very good thing. Think about it all the time, think about it a lot. And one could even argue that it has to be the most important thing for you if you want to reach stream entry. If it is not, then something else will draw your attention more. So, yeah, it has to be your life's purpose. Otherwise, yeah, one could even say that you could spend your time better. Yeah. Okay, I think that's about it for this question. Let us move to the next one, even though this one is addressed to Flaus. It's for Saif. In the lecture series, you mentioned the Dhamma follower. Could you elaborate that a bit? Would you equate a Dhamma follower with the attainment of the mundane right view?
I mean, I think you should answer, because I feel like you have more experience with it as well.
Maybe I have. Yeah, I will answer it as good as I can. The Buddha listed various kinds of noble individuals, and he listed the Arya Sangha, also the Sangha of noble individuals, and those also contain the Dhamma follower and the faith follower. And those two types of person have the understanding of dependent origination, as I understand it. They have a very early version of the right view, so in essence, they are noble ones, and they will reach final Nibbana. I think the Buddha gave us the guarantees that a person who has attained that state will attain the full penetration to the Four Noble Truths, either in this life or on the deathbed. I think that's what you can take from the suttas. So in that sense, that person is already a very early version of a noble one. However, that does not relate at all to the mundane right view. The mundane right view is, as we described before, I think in the Q&A number 1, is more or less the necessary precondition and the necessary mindset to practice rightly. Namely, that you need the self-honesty, that you need responsibility, that you have to have faith in the Buddha and in the enlightenment of the Buddha and all those things that are necessary to even attain the real right view. But that specific attainment, namely the attainment of the Dhamma follower, is simply an experiential understanding of dependent origination. So that person has seen the 3 marks really, and it sticked. And now they are searching for the right words and everything to make sense of all of that. They have seen, okay, there is nothing in my experience that could be called a self, and they will very likely immediately recognize it as a state of non-self, but that does not mean that they know all the surrounding terminology that the Buddha introduced. So that is more or less the state. And I think the Buddha gave us a guarantee. He said that a person, just like the the dawn heralds the rising of the sun, so too the attainment of the right view heralds and foretells the penetration of the Four Noble Truths. So it is just a causal, necessary step that will follow from the right view. Yeah. But it depends a bit on your strengths of craving and your level of restraint. If you understand the Dhamma based on a lot of sense restraint, it is very likely that you will immediately reach a very high stage of attainment, like stream entries, or full stream entries, non-returner, or anything like that. People in the suttas did that all the time. So yeah. Anything you have to add to that?
In my view, it's not really like, you shouldn't, I think of yourself. You can't really like call yourself a Dhamma follower, because like Flaus was saying, you've seen dependent origination, but like you still have that like confusion. You can't really sort of place yourself. You can only sort of only retrospectively know yourself, or I was a Dhamma follower then, now I've become Sotapanna and all that. So you can't really call yourself a Dhamma follower. You need to still, if you haven't reached stream entry still needs to be the threshold really, for going beyond doubt. So that needs to be if you're not reached that point, you need to be thinking like I need to do more work. Even if you have like sort of, you've had an experience of not self, for example. But if you're not beyond doubt, then there's more to do basically. That needs to be a threshold.
Yep. That's actually very important. That's not a stage that you can actually diagnose for yourself. Some other person can maybe recognize what you experienced if they are very skilled at it, but you yourself, you are still subject to doubt at that point. In that sense, you are still going by faith or going by logical reasoning or something, and use that as a vehicle for further understanding the Dhamma. It is a real thing, but for all practical purposes, it is much better to go and check if there is still doubt in your experience, as stream entry is very much going beyond doubt. Yeah, I think that answers that question very, very well. Then let's move to the next one. And this one is then for you. How can I understand what a Sankhara is? One of the most difficult words in Buddhism, I would argue.
There's like a few different ways that the Sankhara is used, which makes it a bit more confusing. But if you want like the most practical understanding, Sankhara is basically that which things stand upon. So it's like a basis for something else. That's what Sankhara is. Which means it's like discerning what Sankharas are is very closely related to what we talked about earlier about Yoniso Manasikara. You can basically see them as equivalent things. Like if you want to see the body of the Sankhara, for example, you don't, you can look at it as like, you can perceive it, you can think about it, you can ponder about aspects. But like seeing it as a Sankhara means you see it as a basis for your perceiving, for your thinking. In that sense, it requires this sort of awareness that's like called the womb attention earlier, or peripheral awareness. The main thing is that you can't directly perceive it because it's always peripheral. It's always the basis. It's always at the womb. So wherever you're looking at, Sankhara is always the basis of that. So you can like look at the body, for example. But if you want to discern it as Sankhara, you need to see that the body is a basis for your looking. And this is like really important to understand. As we said earlier, this is like the basis of the right attention because impermanence, as the Buddha says, it's sabbe sankhara anicca, which means that it's on the level of sankharas. You need to see it on that level. It's not like this random thing, like this fridge is impermanent, or this coffee is impermanent, or this political system out there is impermanent. It's the basis for me perceiving any of these things. The body, for example, that's impermanent. That's why all the rest of it is impermanent. That's why all the rest of it is dukkha. That's why everything else is not self. So that's like the basic, the most practical understanding of what Sankhara is, related to the right attention. And if you understand that, you develop understanding of how to attend to the basis of things. That's how you can use that as a basis for understanding dependent origination, understanding all Sankharas are anicca, all Sankharas are dukkha, all phenomena not self. Yeah, that's the ending of self-view. Yeah, that's a very like concise way of talking about. Obviously, it's going to be much probably much harder. But yeah, that's how you want to think about Sankharas, the basis of things.
Yeah. The problem is that understanding Sankharas fully means that you pretty much have understood the Dhamma. So there's no real easy or simple way to explain to you what a Sankhara is. When I was very early in my practice, that term troubled me a lot. I was reading all the time about formations, fabrications, Sankharas, or whatever you want to call it. And I did not understand it. I did not understand it in the slightest. And the lucky part was that I was honest enough with myself to acknowledge that I did not understand that at all. So I looked further and further, and that is the same thing that you should do when you have not fully understood what a Sankhara is, because fully understanding it as the basis for everything that is related to self, pretty much. And then you can transcend self pretty much based on that understanding. So yeah, once you understand that, you pretty much have the right view. Okay, I think even if we would have said more about it, it would not really help, given what I have just said. So let us move to the next question. If the person who wanted that answer has more follow-up questions, then by all means, feel free to ask them down below. But for now, let's move to the next question. Okay, this one is from George Smith. And the question is as follows. How can Chanda as intention or zeal and Citta as mind or heart mind be understood? How is the heart liberated, working directly with one's feelings, emotions, perceptions, and those kind of aspects? It's a rather loaded question. Yeah, well, maybe I start in the middle because I find that most suitable. So first of all, the part that is liberated in your experience is the Citta, the heart, the part that perceives and feels pretty much, because our entire experience pretty much converges on the point of feeling. So when we suffer, then we always suffer a feeling, pretty much. We always are subjected to that, and that is the immediate part that bothers us in our experience. So when we are talking about liberation, then we liberate that part, pretty much. This is pretty much why Sotapanna has pretty much no suffering left. His Citta is basically liberated till you pulled out the arrow, and now there's just a wound that remains that has to heal. So that is what is still there for a Sotapanna. And how to liberate the heart? Well, the entire practice of Buddhism aims at that very thing, namely understanding the Dhamma, and understanding the way out of suffering means that you pretty much transcended suffering. And you can use feelings or emotions and perceptions as a vehicle for that. As the Buddha mentioned, a person who has fully understood feeling is an arahant. And emotions, that's a bit harder to answer because you cannot really classify that in the Buddhist system of the, for example, 5 aggregates. The closest thing you could use to describe an emotion would maybe be a mood or something like that, which again would be pretty much what Citta is. It's the entire state of your mind pretty much, which can be elated, exalted, depressed, heavy, light, or whatever. But yeah. And well, do you have something to add on that question? Maybe I'm missing something. Again, that's really loaded with
I mean, to summarize, really, it's the main thing you need to know is that, like, the Citta is where liberation happens because it's where the feelings occur, and the whole practice is about feeling, because that's where craving is located. Craving is towards or away from feelings, and as soon as feeling is liberated from craving, that's it. There's nothing more to be done, really. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, Chanda, maybe more on that word. I must admit, I don't have a perfect understanding of the word Chanda. As I understand it, it's really just a more overarching kind of desire that is not so much situated when it comes to Tanha, craving the immediacy, but more of a overarching aim or goal towards liberation, as an example. But maybe you understand it in another way.
I mean, I would say mainly that it's not something one should really focus on too much, because a lot of the time I see it as, like, people say, oh, there's Chanda and then there's Tanha, craving, and then this is like desire that's fine, and then craving is the one that's bad. When I see it, it's usually used as like maybe not as people don't have bad intentions with it, but it's used as a sort of excuse for like, it's fine for me to act out this desire. But like we said before, it's like the Buddha veers more towards renunciation than anything. Like, really, if you're dwelling without craving, it's going to be that you're acting less out of desires more than more. Really, most of the time, there's just going to be like thoughts and intentions appearing, and they're not being acted out of. So, main thing you want to think about really is like craving and not acting out of craving. And don't overthink about Chanda. That'll be something that might be revealed later on as craving is lessened. But you don't really want to think this is the active desire and this is the bad desire. It's just get rid of craving, and then whatever's left, that's fine, and then you'll know it is fine because there's no craving left.
Yeah, and also even not every tanha, so to speak, is unwholesome. The craving to stay alive and be healthy to practice is ultimately dangerous and ultimately something that shackles you to samsara. But relatively speaking, given your level of progress, if you have not yet reached stream entries, and it's very much something that you should have, by all means you should avoid a truck or a deadly animal that rushes towards you, simply because it allows you to practice. The question is pretty much always, is this craving that I have right now underlined by a tendency for having more craving in the future? So this is maybe a bit more useful than the distinction between Chanda and Tanha.
Yeah.
Even some Tanha can be somewhat wholesome. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say also, like, distraction is also one that has to be focused on as well, because a lot of people will stop acting out of like more grosser forms of sensuality. But like delusion as a term is sort of hard to understand, so people don't understand it as like this distraction attitude, and so they will keep acting out desires which are not exactly sensuality necessarily, but they are still like within the sensual domain because they're acting out of that distraction sense of self. And the term Chanda can be used as like sort of justification for that. This is like the fine type of desire because it's not for gross form of sensuality. But yeah, if you're free from distraction, like you're basically going to be dwelling most of the time just in non-activity, not doing things really, unless you have duties and things you like your purpose is. But otherwise, you're just like dwelling, abiding. That's it.
No. You would be perfectly fine just sitting somewhere or walking somewhere. Or, well, I mean, your body has to be in some posture. It's a body; it has to do something. But overall, you don't use it as a basis for gaining pleasure or distracting yourself. That's probably a good way of putting it. Yeah, I hope that question is suitably answered. Otherwise, again, feel free to always follow up question everything we put out here. And let us move to the next question. This one is from Trace Reaper again, and it's for Saif. And I hope he can answer it well, because he probably knows a thing or two about God. What is the position of God during and after stream entry?
Very heavy question. But I mean, fundamentally, there is no like position on God after stream entry, because fundamentally, like the Dhamma is not about God. Like it's about dependent origination. One who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination. One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma, and there is no mention of God in dependent origination. I don't know how exactly he says it, but the Buddha says something like, seeing mindfulness of the body means seeing the deathless. And yeah, that's all you need to do, like understand the nature of the body or feelings, and that's it. That's the full nibbana, full dispassion, full unconditioned. There is no need for this extra, like either creator God, or whether you have like a more lofty notion, like it's a ineffable ground of being, like the supreme identity. Wherever it is, it's not really part of the thing. If you do sort of veer towards these notions of God, like after stream entry, like obviously you have this direct experience of what is the path or what isn't the path, which means that like you can read texts from other traditions and so on, and you can sort of see the extent to which it matches your experience, and you can like use different sorts of language if you want. But fundamentally, you're going to always be sort of distrustful of any language that is not related to how the Buddha talks about it. Because when you become a stream entrant, it's impossible to take any teacher except from the Buddha, and you have full confidence in the Buddha. This is the accurate way of speaking about it. And you can, if someone talks about like the supreme identity or something in relation to God and so on, you can kind of, especially if you develop composure, you can kind of know what they're talking about to a certain degree. But you're always going to know that it's sort of a very inaccurate way of speaking about things. And especially if you talk about this sort of way to someone who is not a stream enterer, it will lead them in all sorts of directions of speculation, of wrong attention, a thicket, fetter reviews, like the Buddha would talk about it. One only has to read like medieval philosophy to see the amount of like theological disputes of the most random questions concerning God, how much like diversification on notions of God and so on, to know that it's just a trap you don't want to really enter really. And dependent origination is quite enough. With dependent origination, all sort of speculations and views and any like all is unity, I am here, and this in relation to God, and this or that, all of that just sort of ceases, and you don't need it anymore. So, notion of God is not really a necessity in Buddhism, I would say. I think it depends also on like where you lean towards. If someone has no interest in the notion of God, like they just probably won't even care as a stream enterer.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, because I could have never answered it in that level of detail, simply because I never really had any interest in God as you described it. So I never really followed any kind of teaching in that direction. It was never really natural for me. So
yeah, my background was definitely like, because my background was in Spinoza first, and he, like, people call him like the God intoxicated man, because everything's about God, everything's related back to God. And yeah, I was interested in like people like Meister Eckhart, Ibn Arabi, and so on. And there is like some similarities in Buddhism, but like when you gain discernment from the suttas, you realize all of that sort of speech is sort of inaccurate, and you don't really need it anymore, and it just becomes like straw in your hand. Basically, it's like I don't really want to talk about it in this way. It's not accurate, really. You'd rather just teach someone mindfulness of the body, and that's it. Full discussion from that.
You know the hardwood of the teaching. You know the part that does the work, and then you know all the fluff out there. And you probably cannot bring yourself to be interested in that heap of fluff anymore. At least I can't. It's impossible for me. I can pick up a book for a day or two, but there is no sincere interest in those things, and I really have to bring myself to read that. Even when people ask questions about such things, then I can maybe do it because there is some kind of purpose involved. But on my own, I would never really do that anymore, unless it is my job or something. But it is not. So it's hard to manufacture that kind of passion or anything for that. Yeah, I hope that answers that question. Let us maybe move to the next one. And this one is again a bit loaded, and it's a question that I get so often that I have generalized it into a more concise version. And the question is as follows. It's from many people. Again, it's condensed. Are methods like the Mind Illuminated, Leigh, and many of the other techniques that are out there, there are hundreds, beneficial when it comes to liberation? And this one might be a bit more difficult to answer. It might even deserve an entire video, but nonetheless, we can try here. Because people will likely demand a complete understanding from our side of all those methods. And I can say that at least Saif has practiced the Mind Illuminated. I have done so too, to some degree. I have practiced the Leigh stuff. I have practiced the Ayakema stuff. I have practiced a lot of those things, and they all led to a dead end. So this is very important, because those methods, what they pretty much all have in common is that they are somewhat pleasure focused. That is incredibly easy to use the methods that are described there as a means to generate a somewhat pleasant abiding. You manipulate your circumstances to generate good feelings. The entire last 3 chapters of The Mind Illuminated are pretty much nothing but shaping your experience to be more nice, while in reality Dhamma is about being fine with your experience no matter how it is. Even when there are bad feelings, you are still at peace. And once you have created a tool for yourself that you can use very easily and very readily available to make your experience more nice, then you can ask yourself, would you use that tool when suffering arises? And in 99.999% of cases, the people would readily use that tool. They would leap to that tool as soon as the slightest discomfort arises and use it instead of enduring the suffering so that you can understand it. And in that sense, many of the methods are very, very dangerous, especially before stream entry, as they give you the tool to remove that arisen suffering, but they don't give you the tool to prevent that suffering from arising. So, yeah, it's it's a very hot topic, and people really hate it when we, let's say, discredit or criticize some of those methods and tools. But I find that criticism very legit, to be honest. And in my opinion, it's a very good idea to criticize this rightly, because of the many people that kind of prevent themselves from making progress in the Buddha's dispensation based on that. Well, you probably also have a thought or two on that.
Like the main thing about these practices is that they're all about like focusing on an object of your meditation. Whether it's like more of a wide awareness of it, or whether you're fully focused in, fundamentally you have an object of your meditation and you sort of tie your attention to it, and you don't want to be like too distracted from it. You want to concentrate on it. But you only have to listen about what we said earlier about Yonaso Manasikara to see that it's literally in the opposite direction. Like looking at your object and seeing the basis of your existence, the womb attention. Like it's not only 2 different things, they're in completely opposite directions. And you realize, like, when the Buddha talks about the opposite direction of the Yonaso Manasikara, it was always 3 things: lust, aversion, delusion. Those are the weakness of wisdom. Those are the things that limit your attention, limit your perspective. And like fundamentally, these practices that focus on an object of your meditation, they're different from like gross sensuality in the sense that it gives you this sense of calm. But fundamentally, it is taking you away from that Yonaso Manasikara, the wise attention, the basis of your existence, which requires you not to be focused on an object, but to be secluded from craving towards any objects, very like the most wide possible awareness possible, which is only acquired through basically renunciation of sensual pleasures for a prolonged period of time, until your like attention is just secluded from being absorbed in activities. And then when you do that, you also realize like these practices are like they're doing, they're a form of like distraction and so on. Like if you just seclude yourself from craving, you just don't act out of lust, aversion, or distraction, you realize like, okay, I've done that. I've realized that I have calm from it. Why do I need to do this extra thing now in the opposite direction of what I've already been doing, of going towards an object? You realize there is none. Like virtue, it's about withdrawal, sense restraint, withdrawal, seclusion, withdrawal. And then last step, I'm going to concentrate back on an object. You realize it's the complete opposite direction. And that will be realized, obviously, if you have like virtue and sense restraint and seclusion first. Yeah. I mean, many things could be said about it, but that's the gist, basically. Yonaso Manasikara is the opposite direction of focusing on an object. So, yeah.
That's a very touchy topic for a lot of people. That's why or at least I am very hesitant to talk too much about it, because again, people don't take it very well. But yeah. Can be something else may be said about that. No, not really. Well, again, if you have questions or perplexity or doubt concerning anything we have said right now about this question, feel free to ask down below. Then we have something where we can link to when people ask the question again. And this makes it a lot easier for us, because we can't know what your views and doubts and perplexities and everything are. We only have an inkling based on the experiences we have with other people. But ultimately, ask those questions and then we can clarify it further. That's maybe the easiest way. Okay, then we used up a lot of time for those questions. Let's maybe move to the next one. Maybe we have time for one or two more. And this one is again from Trace Reaper, and I think he wants to know more about the Christian God. And this is probably again for Saif. What is the role of Christian God in liberation in terms of all is mind, unity, and no separation and all those things?
None whatsoever, really. I mean, especially if you have like a very simplistic conception of Abrahamic God in terms of like it being a sort of creator God, especially personal God. Those are very overtly critiqued in the sutras, and those can't be tenable. Ones that are a bit more lofty, like all is mind and unity, no separation, non-duality, and those things, they can seem a bit closer. But even then, like there are them sutras where, like, you know, those cosmologists in the sutra, they would come to the Buddha, and they would ask, "Is all oneness? Is all plurality?" and so on. And the Buddha would always like refuse to answer, and he'd always just give them the dependent origination doctrine, because that's what you need to understand. You don't need to understand no separation, because no, there is separation. Like I am me, Flaus is Flaus. This is 5 aggregates here. It's just that it's not mine, basically. It's not about, you don't merge with the world and so on. And same with like unity and oneness. None of that is dependent origination. Same with all is mind. Like when you do mindfulness of the body, it's the opposite of that. You're aware that there is body as a basis for your existence. So yeah, that's the main thing. Is none of these doctrines talk about dependent origination. That's the main thing you need to understand. And sometimes there are characteristics of someone who has penetrated dependent origination, which can seem similar to these things of unity and non-duality. But fundamentally, if you haven't penetrated anything, that's what you need to be thinking about: dependent origination, not unity with God, which is like amounts to so much proliferation of speculation and so on. Like, if you have thoughts about all is mind, you know, be aware that you're having these thoughts on the basis of the body being here. That's all you need to know, and that will result in dispassion. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Similar to the last question about God, really.
Yeah, it was from the same person, so I guess it's thoroughly answered now. Maybe one aspect when it comes to all is mind, I guess you could relate it a bit to the fourth foundation of mindfulness, namely that whatever you have access to also has a quality of thinking or thought about it. So you could use that in that way to generate dispassion. But again, it's about the dispassion that you generate that you can use as a vehicle to understand dependent origination then. So yeah.
But again, even then, like all in mind, the danger is that you get these like idealist conceptions that are like the Madhyamaka school and the Yogacara school. They often tend towards like basically annihilationism, because all is mind, and then next thing to think about is nothing really exists, and that's the danger in all is mind. But that's not, you don't have that danger if you have dependent origination, because there never is things don't exist or things exist. It's always something exists with this is condition, with the ending of this condition, this ends. So these categorical statements and so on are always sort of they're subject to delusion to some degree. It needs to be understood at that level of dependent origination, and then you will be safe from these kinds of things.
Yeah, well, that's actually the gist of it. The normal Jhana's mind, the unenlightened mind, the mind of the uninstructed worldling, automatically radiates towards one of those extremes. They want it black or white. They don't want the conditional statement. They don't want, with this as a condition, there is self. Without that condition, self is not. They want it either yes or no, and this is a real danger. You have to accept that ambiguity, I guess. That unclarity, that vagueness. And again, it's not really vague or anything. Once you understood dependent origination, it's crystal clear. You see it everywhere. You cannot unsee it, but yeah. Okay. I think that's enough when it comes to that question. And as the recording time is running out, I would again thank you all for your attention, and we see us in the next video in a second. Okay, then back to the next question, this time from Richard Sengupta. He wants to know, are the higher jhanas after the fourth jhana, real, or are they just imaginations? Because things like boundless space, boundless consciousness, boundless nothingness, boundless perception, yet no perception, seem like astral travel. I'm not too familiar with astral travel or anything like that. I really have just some very rudimentary notions of that concerning lucid dreaming, for example. I personally have no real experience with that, apart from the lucid dreaming, which I did in my very early 20s, which was fun, but not very Dhamma related. But it might be necessary to say that the Buddha talked about many of those states, like flying cross-legged, touching the sun and moon, so mighty, and all those things. So those are factually in the suttas. So a person who has developed samadhi to a very high degree can access those states if they wish to, as I understand that. So are the higher jhanas real? They are real, as all experiences are real. So there's no non-real experience in any way. So whatever you experience, that's actually there. But they are certainly very different from normal experience. So you have to create a very, very good foundation in samadhi to experience any of those. As I understand them, and as they are portrayed in the suttas, they are variations of the fourth jhana, pretty much, with a special direction, let's say it, let's put it like that, applied to them. And yeah, they are very real, but probably none of anyone's concern that should be concerned with understanding dependent origination. So those are very lofty states, very, very, very close to a full arahantship, and there's no real benefit in contemplating those states right now. Yeah. Anything you want to add?
They're very prone to like conceptual proliferation, because like boundless space, boundless consciousness, and things like that, they're not very like close to anything you experience in mundane sense realm. But if you like, all you should focus on is developing first jhana, basically, which is much more feasible. And then like all the rest of the jhanas you will have basically as a potentiality, because they all follow the same principle. So if you understand the nature of the first jhana, even if you haven't reached the formless jhanas yet, you understand like the principle. You understand basically, if I keep practicing this way, just develop it further, I will go towards formless jhanas. So yeah, just focus on the first jhana, and then if you want to focus on the other ones, that'll come with time, basically.
No. People really want to have those lofty states, as many meditation teachers make them sound very nice, and surely they are very lofty and very nice, but in a very calm and very neutral way, if you go by the descriptions of the Buddha. So there is no ecstatic pleasure, there's no rapturous qualities or anything like that anymore. Those fade. What is left is perfect equanimity, and that perfect equanimity is the basis of the formless jhanas, pretty much. So I would strongly advise going for those, not going for those states, because it's freakishly easy to misinterpret your experience in many different ways. As an example, when I was early in my practice, I of course also made those wrong assumptions that I have attained any kind of boundless consciousness state or boundless infinity of space state or anything like that. There are states where everything vanishes pretty much, sure, but that does not mean that that is a fifth jhana or anything like that. No, I think that's pretty important. Yeah. Should we move to the next question?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. The next question is from Trace Reaper again, and he says or asks, during your explanation of the second noble truth, you said that suffering is based on many things, but by removing one factor, suffering as a whole cannot arise. If this is the case, should it be easier to remove a different factor, since craving is difficult to remove, or is craving the only factor that we can really influence? I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but in general, there are several factors of our experience that seem inviting and that pretty much motivate us to modify them so that we experience less suffering. The problem is that we cannot really control our experience as a whole. So if we could control it and make it obey our command, and we could actually make sure that there are only good feelings, then surely that would be a good way out of suffering, but that's not possible. So we have to work with experience as it is, and the Dhamma is very precise when it comes to that. So first by weakening craving and later by uprooting it, we transcend suffering, and that is the only way that we really have. So we can speculate about other ways, but they don't really work, as I understand it. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, craving is like, it's the second noble truth. So craving is the most like proximate experience, co-equivalent with suffering. By removing the factor thing, it basically means that you don't have to understand like every link of dependent origination. You don't have to be like, I understand ignorance and Sankharas and then consciousness and all that. You just need to understand basically that suffering is, for example, dependent on the body or is dependent on the feelings. You just need to understand one of them, and then that uproots the whole dependent origination, the links basically, the sprout to suffering. You don't need to do all of them, and it can be different for each person. Some persons can do it by learning about intentions, some people about bodies, some people about feelings. But whichever one you do, it results in freedom from suffering because it uproots craving, because it uproots self, and so on. So,
yeah, I think even among us there are individual differences. As I understand it, you have mainly used feelings as a vehicle, as an example, while I have mainly used intentions as a vehicle. That came more natural to me. The result is nonetheless the same. So
yeah. It's different for different people. Like now when I try to like teach, I normally use the body, even though the feelings was my vehicle. The body seems like a much more palpable thing. But yeah, you can kind of experiment with different things, but stick with one thing is the main thing. Like, don't just be like intention, then body, then feelings. You have to realize that like whether I go towards intentions or body or towards feelings, it's on the basis of one factor. It's on the basis of feeling. And that's how you surmount it all, because you realize all of it's based on understanding just this one thing. Like literally everything that can be experienced, past, near, far, future, past, whatever it is, it's on the basis of feeling being here right now. And that's why it uproots suffering towards anything possible.
Yeah, exactly. That is a very good point. You should really just focus on one thing. It is inviting to try and check off a list of things and just put a cross behind everything and then be done with it, but that's not how it works. Same.
It really is like you just need to understand one thing, and you understand dependent origination through that. That's it.
Yeah. That's also what the Buddha said. He said, I only teach two things mainly, suffering and how to stop it. That's all. That's the most concise summary that you can pretty much give. And that's enough. Yeah.
Noble method for human entry. With this, that is, with the ending of this, the ending of that. Basically, that's all you need to know.
No.
It's one factor.
That is the most general or the most pragmatic way of stating dependent origination. With this is. Without this cannot be or cannot come into being, or however you want to phrase it. But those are just two things. One thing and another thing.
Like you don't need to think about this and then this and then this. All you realize is with the body, there are these thoughts here. And that's it. That's all you need to understand.
Yeah. And I think the Buddha used the body most often in any kind of contemplation or teaching he gave. So it's kind of intuitive for us to also teach the body as a basis. Yeah. Let us move to the next question, I guess. This one is from George Smith, and this one is a bit more loaded, I guess. I have given you a QR code in case you want to follow along with the sutta that George mentioned. And he wants to know, in the sutta, the Buddha talks about the relationship between Brahmaviharas and Jhanas, and wants to know how that should be understood. And yeah, I think this question is mainly for Saif, but maybe we should first give the listeners a short summary what is in the suttas or in the sutta. I have looked it up. Have you also looked it up and can explain it, or?
Are you going to read straight from it?
I don't have it open, but I would summarize it. If you have it open, then feel free to read from it.
You might also summarize it. I was going to say you might as well summarize it.
Okay, summarize it. Yeah, sure, I can do that. The summary is quite short. And there are ascetics from other sects that are approaching the Buddha, and they are explaining their way of practice to the Buddha or to other disciples of the Buddha. And they say, we are practicing the first jhanas, you are practicing the first jhanas. We are practicing the Brahmaviharas, you are practicing the Brahmaviharas. What is the difference? We are doing the same thing, basically, they say. And then they go to the Buddha, the disciples that were there, and ask, what is the distinction? What is the difference between those two kinds of teachings? And then the Buddha explains. And the difference is basically that the noble disciple has the right view, and the wanderers of other sects don't have the right view. So their practice of jhana is incomplete, their practice of the Brahmaviharas is incomplete. All kinds of practices that they do are incomplete in that regard. They have not understood dependent origination. And then the Buddha continues and explains how the development of, for example, metta naturally leads to the jhana of the infinity of space, I think. And then the development of compassion, the second Brahmavihara, leads to the infinity of consciousness. And then the next one leads to the infinity of nothingness. So this is a very concise summary. So based on that, maybe we can, or you can start answering.
Yeah, so the question, I guess, is mainly about the relationship between the Brahmaviharas and the Jhanas there. I won't really get into specifics about like the specific culmination in the formless jhanas, because obviously if someone is experiencing formless jhanas, they don't need any more instruction, really. But the relationship between Brahmaviharas and jhanas in general is that like they're sort of based on the same principle of seclusion from craving, basically. Obviously, normally for jhana, people usually use like the whole gradual training of sense restraint and everything, and then once there's enough seclusion, you can use it as a basis for entering jhana. But the Brahmaviharas, they use instead of freedom from lust being the main basis, is freedom from aversion and anger and irritation. But because like the hindrances all kind of come as a package, the extent to which you free yourself from aversion is also the extent to which you free yourself from lust. You can't be like lust. Like if you're lustful, you're habitually lustful, you're going to tend towards anger and irritation and so on. And same, like if you free yourself from irritation and anger and so on, there will be less thing of lust. And especially if you develop yourself in Brahmaviharas and the context of like the metta, the friendliness context, the context is basically that wherever person I experience and whatever sentient being, I will have friendly attitude towards them. And what that basically does, it means that you're no longer focused on the particularity of the experience, and all you're focused on is on the universal aspect of non-craving towards it. And because of that context being established of not focusing on the particularity but holding this single context, which holds them all basically, and which keeps them composed. The Brahmaviharas basically can be used as a basis to enter Jhana by basically just shifting the context slightly, like the accentuation basically. I think philosophers talked about like Jhana being a specific mindfulness directed towards the body. So yeah, you can develop Brahmaviharas, develop the context of the universal framework of non-craving, and then you basically shift it a bit and it turns into the Jhanas basically. So that's the relationship. Yeah, what would you like to say on that?
I think I will only add just one small remark. And in general, the most aversion we experience in everyday life is normally directed at other people. So when we experience aversion, it is mainly towards people that we dislike, parents, usually spouses, angry neighbors, or anything like that. So yeah, so that's a very useful tool. If you are no longer moved by that, then that's a good basis of seclusion. So when you seclude yourself from that, then and gain enough distance, then you can pretty much shift your focus and enter the jhana more or less immediately. I don't think I have much else to say when it comes to that. So yeah, basically all of them are kinds of non-aversion. Equanimity. I mean, the Buddha said when he translated the four Brahmavihara, or explained the four Brahmaviharas, the first one is usually called non-ill will, the second one is non-cruelty, then there is non-discontentment, I think, and then there's non-aversion. Those are the four. So those are the absence of kinds of aversion, pretty much, while the jhanas focus more or less on the absence of lust. No. Yeah,
but the five hindrances in general, they kind of come as a package. So yeah, whichever one you kind of escape from, you kind of escape from the whole lot.
No. Those are different sides of the same thing. If you have lust, you also have hatred. It's the same, really. No.
Yeah. There's no aversion. You can't be like slothful or lazy. It's kind of impossible, basically.
No. And that's also very different from how most people practice metta nowadays. Maybe that is something that we should add. So this is not really the repetition of certain sentences and phrases and the spreading love and joy to other people. Those methods can be used, and they can be used to reveal aversion in your experience. So if you avoid, for example, thinking about your parents because you have a bad relationship with them, then having such a meditation can reveal that aversion, and then you can work with it. But then you have to do it in that manner and not try to cultivate nice feelings.
Yeah, the main thing is the method. Obviously, it's not like it has nothing to do with the radiation of certain feelings or development of these sort of feelings of compassion and love and so on. It's literally just about developing framework of non-aversion towards any sentient being that could be. And it has to be on that sort of universal framework, like doesn't matter who it is. You will act the same way towards them. Act of friendliness, non-aversion. And you basically just think about that framework. And then you do have to still do the work of, when that person might do something irritating, you have to keep that framework there and not give in to the aversion until that framework gets stronger and stronger. And that's the main thing, you have to not give in to the aversion. It's not about radiating feelings, because you can radiate feelings as like out of aversion towards them. Like they're hurting me, so I'm going to radiate feelings towards them. Yeah. And that's coming out of aversion. Yeah. So
it has to be a non. You want to stop doing certain things and not add on top of things. That is always a very, very important aspect of Dhamma. And maybe one of the most important ones. We always try to add on top, react in relation to feelings, do something on the basis of feelings and all those things. And that has to stop. It's about restraint, it's about non-doing, non-activity, non-cruelty, non-aversion. Yeah. Okay, I think that might be enough for that question. Let us move to the next one. And this one is from Sankharas. Favalapa, sorry, I'm bad at pronouncing names. And he wants to know, is there still a process of bubbling up thoughts as you enter first jhana? Is there a simile you could use to describe what it's like when you first cross over into it? Is there still a recognition of foreground, like I am on the breath, and background, I just feel an itch? First of all, thinking and pondering are defining characteristics of the first jhana when the Buddha described it. He always mentioned, even with thinking and pondering, he emphasized that it is still there. So he pretty much every description of the first jhana has that. It's not even that those thoughts are wispy or in the background or anything like that. It's thinking and pondering. It's there. Yeah. And yeah, when you enter the first jhana, those things are very much there. And simile you could use to describe what it's like when you first cross over into the first jhana. Well, there's no suffering anymore. There's no sense of self. And you will kind of know that. So there's nothing you can really mistake that with, I guess. Well, there are things. If you have not experienced the real first jhana, then you will leap out to all kinds of states and call them jhana. So that might be a certain danger. And in the same way, the recognition of foreground, I'm on the breath and all those things, or I just felt an itch. There is still an itch, and there is still the breath, but the I, the me, the mine, that's not there. Well, you want to add something?
Yeah. There is, like you said, very much there's thoughts and pondering in jhana, and first jhana at least. And not only is there like thoughts and pondering, but it's thoughts and pondering is basically like correctly perceiving thoughts is how you enter the jhana. Because like if you want, it's not really a simile, but the experience of it is basically like, so you develop the virtue, you develop the sense of strength, you develop moderation, eating, seclusion. So like you're not acting out of unwholesome intentions. You're not using the body for pleasure. You're not using it for irritation, anger, or distraction. You're not using it for idle talk. So you're silent. So you do all this and you're just abiding. And basically what happens is you realize like there are thoughts appearing, there's pondering, but none of it is like coming out of the mouth. Like you haven't been speaking for a long time. And usually when like you speak, you have this automatic assumption that like you do speak, like thoughts basically like they come out of the mouth like that. And what you realize basically is when you've been secluded is that there are thoughts appearing and none of it is able to break out into the body, out of the mouth, into the speech. And that's basically like the composure of mind that constitutes the first jhana, is that basically you realize that the right order has been established and the body is basically just staying there while thoughts are pondering and is appearing, and the division between them just becomes greater and greater and greater and greater the longer that you don't act out of the unwholesome and keep it there. And then you establish it basically so that like once it's established for a while, you realize that like, actually like it's harder for me now to actually go into that domain where thoughts basically break out into speech. Thoughts are just appearing, and it's very hard for them to go out into the speech. And you also realize that like the speech is basically the converging point for sensuality, basically, because if you're not taking ownership of the speech through the thoughts, you also are secluded from the craving of actions of body as well. That's why it's like seclusion of body, then speech, and then mind. So if it's not being taken ownership of like that, you're unable to basically act out of craving, act out of unwholesome. That's why the first jhana is like where perception of sensuality is ceased. You have stopped taking the ownership of the thoughts that then take ownership through the speech and then turn into ownership of the body. It's just thoughts and pondering is there. None of it's coming out of the body. The body is just like a hunk of meat basically enduring in the world, while thinking and pondering is just this completely separate domain. And the longer you stay like that, that division just becomes greater and greater and greater and greater. And then, yeah, completely secluded from the ownership. That's what the first jhana is like. And yeah, like you use the thoughts and pondering as the vehicle to enter the jhana. Because yeah, you realize that the division between the breaking out into speech and the thoughts and pondering, correctly perceiving the right order there, that's how you're entering the jhana, basically. I don't know if my description was like, it was a bit all over the place, but that's basically how it's done. But obviously it depends on prior seclusion from craving. So if you haven't done that already, there's no way you can enter it.
No. Yeah. Well, other descriptions are pretty much freedom from distraction as jhana or something like that. But it's pretty much always the same thing. When you distract yourself, you use the central domain, you interact with it to avoid something. You always rearrange circumstances to make your experience nicer for yourself. And when that stops, then you are very, very secluded in that state where you can enter jhana, basically. And it's an equivalent description, pretty much. Oh. Okay. Well, I understood what you said, but if someone did not understand, if Sam, for example, has a follow-up question, then feel free to ask down below. Then we can tackle that question again and hopefully make it very clear. Again,
I mean, basically, to summarize, if there is no distraction, no acting out of distracting intention, then thoughts and ponderings will be there, but they won't be acting out of. And then you just basically have to perceive that division. And the more that clarity is there, the more you're unable to act out unwholesome. And that's what's the composure.
Yeah. Maybe you could say something about thoughts in general. I think people oftentimes have a very unclear idea of what a thought even is. Most of the time it's just the tiny voices in the mind that says something, which would be verbal thoughts. But yeah, maybe you can clarify a bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, but it's fine if you just think of it as the verbal thoughts for the first jhana, because the first jhana is mainly about the about speech. Also, like thoughts, yeah, they're also about intentions. That's why in the second jhana, obviously, like the verbal mind ceases. It doesn't mean like thoughts will cease. You still think and intend and so on, but you just don't verbally like think about it in the mind with a little voice. But obviously, like you have to develop first jhana first, not break out of speech through the thoughts and take ownership like that. And then you can do the further unification of mind by not thinking verbally with the mind. And then you can think without the verbal. The verbal just completely ceases. The thoughts cease in the second jhana.
Mm-hmm. That's why it's called noble silence. Sometimes. Oh. Yeah, again, I think we can't make it much clearer based on the information we have. So we have to wait if someone wants to know something else about that. And then we can clarify.
Basically, it's confusing until you've been secluded from craving. Because once you're secluded from craving and distraction, like it becomes obvious. Like, yeah, there are thoughts appearing here, and like the body is just hunk of meat, and it's not coming out through the mouth. This ownership that I had of like I speak, thoughts come and they come out the mouth. It's just completely been disembodied, basically. But until you like, if you're still like taking the ownership of the mouth all the time, habitually, like this is just something like you can't understand. That's why the restraint from craving has to be done in advance, and then you will understand it. So if you're not to that level, think about like virtue and sense restraint first. Think about jhana later on.
Yeah, that's also very important. I think in chapter 9 I speak about that a lot. But the training of the Buddha has an order. You have to do certain things first, and then the next step, and all that naturally develops, really. But you cannot just jump ahead. The Buddha gave the simile of a cow who tries to take 2 steps at once in the mountains, and then it just falls and gets no state, no second jhana, no first jhana, no nothing. And that's always a danger if you want to leap ahead. You want to avoid that. And most people that ask those questions are should very much focus on virtue, sense restraint, gradual training, understanding, and all those things. Because that is what is lacking most of the time today. No. Okay, let's move to the next question. And this one is again from Trace Reaper, and he wants to know, is it possible to be cut off from the possibility of achieving right view or full attainment, almost like a false enlightenment? Well, I will answer that. And yes, it is possible to be cut off from that. And the Buddha listed a few things that are so severe that they will bear immediate fruit. For example, matricide, namely killing your father, killing your mother, drawing the blood of the Tathagata, namely the Buddha, killing an arahant, and all those things. You require such incredibly strong craving for that that you are pretty much irredeemable for this life. So the next rebirth that you will have is under guarantee in hell. No matter if you believe in that or not, the state of mind that is necessary to produce such actions is only suitable for that realm of rebirth. Yeah. And concerning a false enlightenment, I'm not entirely sure how that relates to it. But you can certainly get lost in wrong views of any kind. And as an example, if you, for example, have developed jhana before attaining the right view in a different context from Buddhism, then it's very unlikely, as I understand it, that you actually try to find additional solutions. That you try to find Buddhism, for example, and try to find the way out of suffering, as you are basically experiencing no suffering at all. And it wasn't rare in the suttas that people thought themselves to be arahants while they only had some jhanas, as an example. Only. You are basically free from suffering. But yeah, based on that, it's very difficult to actually make an additional search for more, for many people at least. Oh. Anything you want to add?
There's also the a trap of practicing Buddhism without the right view, but thinking you are practicing correctly. Especially if you've been practicing for like a long time, a certain technique and so on, you have gotten benefits from it, but you haven't reached right view, you haven't understood the Four Noble Truths. A lot of that times, like, you're just going to end up clinging to what you're used to, basically, and it's going to be very hard to do anything else. That's why we've talked a lot about like the right threshold for having understanding, which is stream entry, which you do go beyond doubt. So like we've talked about before, you need to, if you're not gone beyond doubt, even if you're getting benefits, you need to be having that the goal in mind, the threshold in mind, that I need to do more work till I reach that point where I've gone beyond doubt, and then I know what to do, basically. And if you don't have that threshold, you can just get trapped in like habits, meditation habits and so on, which are beneficial, they calm you, but they're not doing the full work of uprooting suffering.
No, that's so important. Well, we can repeat it over and over again, and at some point, hopefully the message will sink in, but people really have a hard time understanding that extreme necessity for having the right view, because without it, everything you do can be wrong, and you have no frame of reference that you could use to make sure that what you do is right. And that should weigh heavy on your mind and really should bring forth a sense of urgency so that you actually try to fully understand that. Well, I think we have time for one more question. Let us move ahead to the next one. It's again from Trace Reaper, and he wants to know, also, is it possible to keep pursuing until the end just based on the desire to make it to the end? Or do you need a substantial reason, like being told you have 3 more months to live by a medical doctor? So what he says is pretty much, is it necessary to have a divine messenger event in your life, or can you practice Dhamma without? And this one is for us.
I mean, the specific one you gave of having 3 months to live, that one is probably too late by that point. I mean, obviously practice by all means. You need to practice by that point, but like, you kind of left it too late by that point. The divine messenger helps a lot in showing you exactly how sensuality is never going to be satisfying, but it needs to be something that's not as hopefully serious as that. Maybe like someone close to you passes away, but it's not that you're in immediate danger or anything. this will be very, very helpful. But you can also just do it based on desire to make it to the end. If you're someone who is quite conscious, and you read the sutras basically, and you do the contemplations, and then that could work.
No, I think in the suttas there was, for example, the Ratapala Sutta, where a king questions an arahant by that time, and wants to know what would be the reasons that people take up the robes and cut off their hair and beard and everything and become monks. And he lists that there are 4 reasons, namely loss of youth, loss of health, loss of relatives, loss of fortune, pretty much losing all those things that are gravely important to everyone. And then Ratapala says that there's a 4th one, namely that he heard the Dhamma from the Blessed One. He understood the severity and the significance of the suttas and what the Buddha was talking about. And simply based on that, he started practicing rightly. So that person required no divine messenger event and was still practicing and became an arahant. He took a quite long time. I think it took him 12 years, because without such a very immediate event, it is a bit difficult to bring forth the vital concern that really drives you towards Nibbana. But it is still very much possible, even if it takes you 12 years. Much better as if you would spend those 12 years engaged in sensuality. Yeah. Anything you want to add?
Don't wait for a divine messenger, obviously. That's the main thing, because by that point, like we said before, it might be too late. So if the urgency isn't there, you just have to make the effort into creating the urgency, because factually there is danger. You just need to see it correctly, basically, and you just need to repeat it to yourself until it sinks in. Don't leave it till it's too late.
Yep. Exactly. Okay, I think that is enough for today. We only have a few minutes of recording time left. Again, thank you all for being here and for your questions. If you have more of them, by all means, leave them down below. We will answer all of them, no matter how long it takes. Well, no matter how long it takes, but we will try our very best. As of right now, we receive a lot of questions, so we will have at least 5 Q&As in total. And yeah, again, I guess have a nice day and goodbye.